On a quiet night in the fishing region of Brittany, France, the silence was shattered by a violent blaze. When firefighters arrived, they were stunned by what they saw: a car engulfed in flames at the edge of a deserted area. The fire lit up the dark coastal road with a fierce red glow. When the flames were finally brought under control, the discovery inside the vehicle was even more horrifying. In the trunk lay a body burned beyond recognition. But the shock did not end there. While firefighters were still working at the scene, another vehicle suddenly rushed toward the area at high speed. As soon as the driver noticed the emergency lights and police presence, the car braked abruptly, turned around, and disappeared into the darkness. The strange behavior immediately raised suspicion among the officers on site, as if someone had approached the scene only to panic and flee. Within hours, the incident transformed into one of the most mysterious murder cases in modern French criminal history. Investigators would reopen the case multiple times over the years, identifying possible suspects and uncovering fragments of evidence. Yet each lead seemed to fall apart before revealing the full truth. You are watching a true crime story, a place where we explore some of the most disturbing and puzzling cases that have left investigators searching for answers for decades. Tonight's case centers on Mary Micheline Conver, a 40-year-old hotel manager whose body was found burned inside her own car in a remote coastal area. What happened to her that night, and who was responsible for such a brutal crime? Before we dive deeper, take a moment to support the channel by liking the video and subscribing so you don't miss future investigations into real criminal cases. Now, let's take a closer look at where this tragedy unfolded. Finistère is the westernmost region of mainland France, a place where the land ends and the vast Atlantic Ocean begins. Along its rugged coastline lies the historic fishing town of Guilvinec, known as one of the most important traditional fishing ports in the country. Life here revolves around the sea. Every summer and autumn, fishermen wake long before dawn, preparing their boats in the darkness so they can return with fresh catches by sunrise. The harbor is usually alive with the sounds of engines, nets, and laughter as crews prepare for another day at sea. Yet in the early hours of the 22nd of May 1994, that peaceful rhythm was shattered by a terrifying discovery. It was just after midnight, around 12:10 a.m., when most residents were still asleep. For fishermen in Guilvinec, however, this was the beginning of their workday. A small group of fishermen had gathered at a bar near the harbor, talking and joking as they prepared for their night at sea. Around 3 a.m., they finally left the bar and headed toward their boat. But once they reached the harbor, they encountered an unexpected problem. Their vessel refused to start. Despite several attempts to fix the issue, the engine would not cooperate. Frustrated, the men eventually gave up and decided to return home. As they drove west, along the coastal road between Guilvinec and the neighboring town of Plomeur, one of the passengers suddenly leaned forward and pointed out the window. In the distance, a thick column of black smoke was rising from an empty patch of land near the road. A strong, unpleasant smell hung in the air. Sensing that something was terribly wrong, the group quickly steered their vehicle toward the source of the smoke. As their headlights illuminated the scene, they froze in shock. A car was burning violently in the darkness. Flames wrapped around the vehicle, sending sparks and thick smoke into the night sky. The intense heat caused metal parts to crack and pop. The body of the car was already warped and partially collapsed from the fire. The glow of the flames lit up the surrounding field, turning the quiet coastal night into a terrifying spectacle. Shaken by what they saw, the fishermen immediately called emergency services. Within about 10 minutes, firefighters and police from Guilvinec arrived at the scene. While firefighters were battling the flames, another strange moment occurred. A separate vehicle suddenly approached the scene at high speed. But just before reaching the burning car and emergency crews, the driver slammed on the brakes, made a sharp turn, and sped away into the night. One of the officers quickly wrote down the license plate number before the vehicle disappeared. At the time, it seemed like a small detail, but it would later become an important clue in the investigation. After a difficult effort, the firefighters finally managed to extinguish the blaze. What remained was a severely burned, white car. The hood had burst open from the heat, the doors were sealed shut, and the metal frame had twisted under the intense temperature. Inside the backseat area, investigators noticed charred pieces of plant material. Nearby, they also detected traces of gasoline and pieces of burned wood. These details quickly suggested that the fire had not started accidentally. Instead, it appeared that someone had deliberately set the vehicle on fire. Based on the damage and burn patterns, investigators estimated that the fire had likely started about an hour before the fishermen first spotted the smoke. But the most shocking discovery came when officers opened the trunk. Inside lay a human body, burned so severely that it was almost impossible to identify. 2 hours later, forensic investigators and a medical examiner arrived at the location. By that time, the night air had grown colder, and the darkness around the empty field made the scene even more unsettling. The destroyed vehicle sat on an isolated patch of land about 100 meters from the coastal road, near an abandoned industrial building. A narrow dirt path led to the area, which had once been used by a small storage facility but had long since fallen into disuse. Tall weeds and wild grass surrounded the site. The condition of the remains made the forensic examination extremely difficult. The body had suffered extensive damage from the fire, preventing doctors from immediately determining the victim's identity or the exact cause of death. However, one important clue emerged during the initial analysis. There was no smoke found in the victim's lungs. This meant that the person had already died before the fire began. Another detail also caught the attention of investigators. The victim's stomach contained no undigested food, suggesting that the death had occurred relatively soon after the victim's last meal. Although the vehicle had been heavily damaged by the flames, the license plate had survived. This allowed police to quickly identify the owner of the car. It belonged to a 40-year-old woman named Mary Micheline Conver, who lived about 10 kilometers away from where the burned car had been discovered. Officers attempted to contact her immediately, but no one answered the phone. Her whereabouts remained unknown. Meanwhile, investigators also tracked down the license plate of the mysterious car that had fled the scene earlier. The vehicle belonged to a local man from the area. When questioned, he explained that earlier that evening he had been drinking with 5 fishermen friends at a bar. Because he was too tired to drive home, he claimed he had walked home and left his car keys behind with his friends. According to him, someone else must have taken the car. Police quickly verified that the 5 fishermen were scheduled to depart for sea at 9:30 the next morning. Concerned that potential suspects might leave the area by boat, authorities immediately contacted the maritime police. The fishing vessel was intercepted before it could leave port, and all 5 men were brought back to shore for questioning. Facing questioning, the men initially denied any involvement. Later, they explained that after leaving the bar, because there were still many hours before their fishing departure, they had borrowed the car to visit other bars and nightclubs. They moved from one place to another drinking until they realized it was already past 3 a.m. By that time, everyone was drunk, but still wanted to continue the night, so they kept driving along the coast, searching for another venue. From a distance, they saw a bright glow and assumed it was the lights of a nightclub, so they excitedly sped toward it. As they got closer, they were shocked to realize it was actually a car burning violently, with police already at the scene. Frightened and aware that they were driving while intoxicated, they immediately turned around and fled to avoid getting involved. The 5 men later provided detailed statements, and police confirmed their presence at several bars and clubs that night. In the end, investigators concluded that their appearance at the scene had simply been a strange coincidence. The fishermen were cleared of suspicion in the murder case, but were still fined for drunk driving. After eliminating the fishermen from the suspect list, the investigation once again stalled. The only remaining lead was the identity of the victim. A few days later, dental examination results confirmed that the body found inside the burned car was indeed Mary Conver, the vehicle's owner. Mary, 40 years old, worked as a local banking advisor. She was known for her elegant manner, energetic personality, and a career that had advanced quickly. She served as a business account manager, with many of her clients being fishermen in the region. Her home in Plomer was located about 10 kilometers north of the crime scene, on a quiet street called Hydrangea Lane, number 13. The house was a two-story traditional French countryside residence, with white walls and brickwork, surrounded by a brick fence and a white iron gate. The property had been inherited from her parents. Her mother had died when Mary was still young, and she was raised by her father, together with her younger sister, Catherine, who was 3 years younger. Although the sisters did not live together, they remained close and met regularly during holidays. At the time of the incident, Mary lived alone with her pet dog. When Catherine heard the news of her sister's death, she was devastated. Investigators later visited the house and heard the dog barking inside. The kitchen and living room on the ground floor were tidy, with no signs of struggle. On a shelf were 2 cups, a plate, and an opened container of pasta that appeared to have been recently eaten. However, one unusual detail caught their attention: a tube of toothpaste sitting in the kitchen that had clearly been used. Upstairs, the bedroom and bathroom appeared undisturbed, and the doors showed no signs of forced entry. Investigators concluded that the house was likely not the primary crime scene. Yet Catherine insisted the toothpaste was strange. She explained that Mary was extremely clean and even somewhat obsessive about order. She would never leave toothpaste in the kitchen. Catherine believed that Mary might have been upstairs brushing her teeth when she heard a noise downstairs. She may have come down while still holding the toothpaste to check what was happening and encountered someone unexpectedly. Further investigation revealed that Mary had a boyfriend named Misson, a doctor who lived about a 5-minute walk from her house. They had been dating for around 9 months. Catherine said that recently her sister had been experiencing relationship problems and had even complained about him roughly 11 days before the incident. Although they often vacationed together and had even discussed marriage, something unusual happened just hours before the crime. Catherine had arranged to meet Mary that evening, but Mary never showed up and gave no explanation. Even more surprising, Misson did not report his girlfriend missing. From these clues, police began reconstructing Mary's final movements before the tragedy. On the evening of the 20th, after finishing work, Mary went to the home of her boyfriend Misson and stayed the night. The next morning at around 6:45 a.m., the two woke up, had breakfast, and planned to meet again at 8 p.m. to pick up a painting they had previously ordered. At about 8 a.m., Mary returned home. Once home, she changed into her work clothes, including a beige trench coat and flat shoes. She made several phone calls to clients to arrange meetings, let her dog out into the yard, and then drove off to begin her appointments. That afternoon, Mary and Misson had lunch with 2 friends at a hotel in Gilvinec before she continued meeting clients for the rest of the day. Around 4 p.m., she delivered flowers and spent about an hour talking with a friend. At 6 p.m., she met her final client, finishing the meeting around 7 p.m. At 7:15 p.m., Mary made a phone call from a public telephone booth to handle work matters. The call lasted about 30 minutes. Although it could not be recorded, it confirmed that she had not yet returned home at that time. At 8 p.m., Mary failed to appear for her scheduled meeting with Misson. Her boyfriend later said he felt a little uneasy, but assumed she had simply changed her mind or been delayed. He went to bed before 10 p.m. and did not attempt to contact her again in the following days, believing she might need some time alone or perhaps wanted to end the relationship. For that reason, he did not report her missing. However, witnesses who saw Mary earlier that afternoon said she had been cheerful and excited about the evening plan. Her boyfriend also stated that she had not been wearing any metal brooches that day. Yet investigators later found 6 decorative brooches in the trunk of her burned car. Her sister Catherine confirmed that those brooches belonged to an outfit Mary usually wore when going on private dates. Another detail raised questions. When police arrived at Mary's home, her dog was locked inside the house. A neighbor also remembered seeing Mary's car parked in front of the house around 7 p.m. Investigators believed that after making the phone call, Mary had returned home, brought the dog inside, changed clothes, and prepared to go out to meet someone. This raised a critical question. Was Mary killed inside her house or somewhere on the way out? Another clue appeared in the kitchen. 2 drinking glasses had been placed upside down on the drying rack, suggesting that Mary might have received a visitor shortly before her death. About a month later, another witness came forward. Around midnight, on the night of the incident, the person had noticed a strange car parked in front of Mary's house. The lights inside the house were off, and Mary's car was not there. The witness only vaguely remembered that the license plate contained the numbers 2 and 9, a detail too unclear to identify the vehicle. A second witness, a woman who often struggled with insomnia and lived nearby, reported hearing the engines of 2 cars around 2:30 a.m. She also heard 2 men talking before one of the vehicles drove away. This time matched closely with the estimated moment when the burned car had been set on fire. Investigators proposed a disturbing theory. 2 individuals may have placed Mary's body in the trunk of her car, set the vehicle on fire, and then left together in another car. Her boyfriend Misson initially became the primary suspect, but he was released due to lack of evidence. Police then began examining other relationships in Mary's life. As a bank advisor with a strong and direct personality, she might have angered certain people. However, none of the individuals investigated appeared to have a clear motive. The case soon reached a dead end. 2 years later, a newly assigned investigating judge decided to reopen the case. He ordered a thorough search of Mary's house once again. Investigators discovered a small trace of blood near the entrance. Unfortunately, the sample was too small, and the forensic technology available at the time was not advanced enough to produce a useful result. Attention again turned toward people close to the victim. Misson was questioned once more. He explained that his earlier behavior, failing to report Mary missing, was due to emotional distress. A psychological evaluation suggested his reaction could be understandable under the circumstances, and he was again cleared. During questioning, investigators also examined a former colleague who had once been angry after Mary received a promotion. The 2 had reportedly argued fiercely in the past, but the colleague had a confirmed alibi and was ruled out. Another unexpected name then emerged: Mark Kolinick, a childhood friend of Mary's. Mark, 33 years old, was a naval soldier who lived directly across the street from her house. Both had lost their mothers at a young age, which had created a strong bond between them. Although he was 7 years younger, Mary had often treated him like a younger brother. According to acquaintances, however, Mark secretly loved her and had shown jealousy whenever she dated other men. On the day of the crime, Mark initially told police he had spent the entire day at the military base. He claimed he returned home around 7:30 p.m. and spent the evening cutting grass in his yard. A few days later, Mark suddenly drank heavily and jumped from the second floor of a building, injuring himself. Because of his condition, investigators were temporarily unable to question him further. 2 years later, his statement changed. He said he had actually gone to Mary's house that evening to borrow gardening tools. The next day, he altered his story again, claiming he had only seen her from a distance. During a later interrogation, Mark suddenly suffered what appeared to be a seizure. He collapsed to the floor and repeatedly muttered, "I didn't mean to do it." Investigators temporarily halted the questioning and searched his belongings, discovering a small piece of paper that read, "Do not change the original statement." This discovery increased suspicion. Yet after leaving the hospital, Mark changed his testimony again, saying the last time he had seen Mary was 2 days before the crime. He explained that his earlier confusion had been caused by psychological pressure. Despite the inconsistencies, investigators still lacked solid evidence. Mark had to be released. As he was leaving, one officer casually asked him again, "Did you actually see Mary that night?" Mark suddenly admitted that he had encountered her and even described where she had been standing. But moments later he became confused and frightened, apparently panicking about being abandoned. Because this remark was not included in an official recorded statement, it could not be used as legal evidence. Medical experts later suggested that Mark's constantly changing testimony might have been related to epilepsy. Under stress, people with this condition can experience confusion, temporary memory loss, or altered awareness, which can affect their recollection of events. However, a final conclusion still required stronger evidence. Mark was released, and the investigation once again fell into a dead end. During this period of stagnation, Mary's family offered a reward of 300,000 French francs for information that could help solve the case. In the year 2000, investigators returned to examine the house again and discovered 8 cigarette butts in the basement. Unfortunately, DNA could not be clearly identified because Mary herself was a smoker, making it difficult to determine whether the cigarette filters were connected to the crime. In the upstairs bathroom, police also found a paper towel with suspicious traces. This discovery deeply frustrated Catherine. She could not understand why. For 4 years after the murder, investigators had not considered the basement an important area for examination and had not properly sealed the house. By the time these items were discovered 6 years later, much of their original evidentiary value had already been lost. 3 years later, in 2003, the arrest of serial killer Michel Fourniret shocked all of France. Catherine began to suspect that Fourniret might somehow be connected to her sister's case because he had previously traveled through the Brittany region. Although there was no concrete evidence linking him to the exact time or location, Catherine believed the possibility should not be ignored. Her lawyer, however, was pessimistic about that theory. Fourniret's victims were typically much younger women, which did not match Mary's profile. Despite this, Catherine refused to give up searching for answers. 20 years after the crime, the investigation had still made little progress. Catherine appeared on television, publicly calling for renewed attention to the case. A year later, a documentary about the murder attracted widespread public interest, especially focusing on Mark, the man believed to be one of the last people to have seen Mary alive. The documentary highlighted the inconsistencies in his statements. Yet once again, the case remained stalled because investigators still lacked enough evidence to bring charges. Mark was never formally prosecuted and remained legally innocent. In June 2022, he died at the age of 61. Despite the many suspicions surrounding him, he was never convicted. Mary's case was often compared to other famous unsolved crimes from the same period in France. Later in 2022, the investigation was transferred to the Cold Case Unit in Nanterre, a specialized division that re-examines unresolved cases using modern DNA technology. However, as the case approached its 30th year, another tragedy occurred. Catherine passed away at the age of 65, carrying with her decades of unanswered questions and grief. Even so, the search for the truth has not ended. The renewed investigation still carries the hope that one day the full story behind Mary's death will finally come to light. The murder of Mary Conver shocked the public, not only because of its brutality. She was killed and her body burned inside her own car, but also because of the many strange details surrounding her personal life. Mary had been a successful and independent woman with a stable career, seemingly on the path toward a new chapter of happiness. Yet, her life ended in tragedy. Her home appeared orderly, but contained several puzzling details. Her complicated romantic relationships, along with the surprising silence of her boyfriend, raised many questions among the public. The deeper investigators looked, the more they suspected that this was not a random crime. Instead, it appeared to involve careful planning and a cold, calculated act by someone who had deliberately chosen their moment. The case became a troubling puzzle. revealing the darker side of relationships that once seemed ordinary, while also showing how fragile a human life can be when faced with hidden motives. Decades later, many questions remain unanswered. Why did a successful and respected woman like Mary become the target of such a brutal crime? Was the motive driven by jealousy, romance, or conflicts related to her work and social connections? And why has such a serious case remained unresolved for so long, leaving the perpetrator free while the victim's family never received a final answer? What do you think about this case? Share your thoughts in the comments to continue the discussion.